Yeah, broadcasting live from a shack on a hill in the Mossy Creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas. This is Lighting the Void live here on the Fringe FM, also YouTube, TalkStream Live, the Paranormal Radio app. God knows where else we're on. I don't know anybody that listens to the show on anything else though, but we are on other streams for sure. So thanks for joining us tonight. It is February the 12th, 2025. Gotta fix a couple of things here, man. I apologize about any background noise that you hear through this microphone, but the heater does sound like a rocket that's taken off at all times, but it keeps this place warm, so I'd rather do the show comfortable and be warm. Did you guys watch Alien Code last night? God, I hope you did. I really hope you did. I'd like to know your thoughts, although I have no idea how to open it up in the show, but if you want to call in, it's 501-777-5631. Also, in the Discord, there's a live show room, so you can just jump in there, and I'm pretty sure I can bring you into the show. So, everybody starts working on the other T-shirts, the Para-Asomatic T-shirts. I think Bryce already started working on that. So, good stuff. The reason why I get frustrated with that is some of these freaking books and journals, these out-of-body journals, are amazing. But they always have some kind of weird thing where they want to name that thing. Imagine if we tried to name every little experience we had while we were exploring consciousness, all the weird stuff that happens. And then they put these crazy scientific names on it, like asomatic, soma-asomatic, things like that. I wish I should download that T-shirt. I think Bryce has one where it actually has a vacuum cleaner on two butt cheeks. So I don't know. Anyways, last night we were talking about the void, and towards the end of discussing this thing, the author of this book, Explorations in Consciousness, Frederick R. Adema, started really kind of talking about some crazy transitional stuff. And that's what we're going to get into tonight, is exotic modes of transition. Okay. Which is, this is a new one for me too. So I haven't went into this thing. I didn't plan it all out. I don't know. Like, I can promise you guys, every night that we do this show, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't even have an outline. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the world could end while you're listening to Lighting the Void or the Fringe FM, and I just don't plan for stuff. It just doesn't seem like it would be as fun. But maybe I'll try it. I'll try to plan one show next week. Like put a little outline on it and see what happens. Maybe, but I like to go with the flow. All right, if you want to join us in the chat room, the Para-Asomatic, right? The only chat room that I can see that's easy for me to look at in my broadcast software is the YouTube chat. So if you're chatting in like Discord or anything, I probably won't see it. What's up, Purple Pencils? Welcome to the Astral Dojo. I forgot to say hi. Let me say hi to everybody that's here so far. MJ, Gypsy Jenny, Sudi, Christy Belly, Sir Wolf, Joanne, Purple Pencils, Dutchy. What's up, Mastermind? Good to have you. Salutations, Eblis. I don't ever say that right. Ryan P. Domek, what's up? And I need to holler at you, brother. Make sure you're all right. And I probably missed somebody. And the lurkers, any lurkers, what's up, y'all? So I'm hoping that last week, what I really want you guys to do, if you can, I love you either way. You don't have to do anything that I ask you to. It's a free world, I guess. But if you can, try to play with the hypnagogic state while you can. I think MJ asked in the Discord chat after the show last night, like, what is the hypnagogic state? And that's, just look it up. It's hard to explain, but it's basically the place between sleep and awake. That's what it is. That's where all the weird stuff happens. So what we're trying to do is have an OBE, right? Or at the very least, have our unconscious project things to us so that we can, I don't know, like see what's going on in there, because the unconscious, that little world where the placebo triggers to the consciousness, that world is where the spirit world likes to come through, the quote, spirit world. So, back to the void. So remember last night when we got off the broadcast, lovely void walking folks. You guys are awesome, by the way. I do love you. Frederick started getting into this idea that this place, this void place where people go to, a lot of times they end up when they're in the hypnagogic state, or they're out of body, or just when they're transitioning between lucid dreams, the OBE state, hypnagogia. There's this weird place that he calls the void. And I've been there. I think it is that same place that people call purgatory or whatever. But really, like, we started talking about how it could be basically just like a construct for conscious programming. And yet when he looked at it, the only way he could describe it was exactly kind of what space looks like. Now, I want you to imagine this, like, if all of this stuff is a virtual reality, like Thomas Campbell says, then what is space? We've had a few people on the show that have claimed that space is an electric static field, right? And the reason why it looks so vast is because we're so small and etc. But really, it's just a massive vacuum of construct for consciousness to program things. That's kind of the way I look at it, even though it's probably not true. But that's my sci-fi, weird sci-fi B-movie theory, based on absolutely no education that I have. Just some kind of weird feeling that that's what it is. It's just this place that consciousness programs things to what we call light, right? And it wants to live. So, but he goes on to say that it should be noted that the emergence of the void is by no means limited to the asomatic transition. Yeah, that's going to be a t-shirt for sure. Basically, the transition to where I guess that you're paralyzed, but you're not aware of your body. So it also commonly occurs after a parasomatic transition. So it's more difficult to recognize because following sleep paralysis, you would generally seamlessly replace the physical environment with its non-physical version, more or less bypassing the void in the process. And we do that a lot. I don't know why. Like if we go straight into a lucid dream or jump into the OBE state, that void space that I'm talking about, a lot of times we don't, we just pass it up, right? So any darkness that you perceive following a paralysis transition to the OBE state is actually, according to Frederick, closely related to the void. And usually this phenomenon is interpreted as blindness, and that's what I thought it was. I'm not playing with you guys, man. Like, if any of you guys have had this happen, let me know, but I've gotten out of body and couldn't see nothing. I could feel around, but it was just pitch black. Like, there was no silhouettes. And it's weird too, because you don't really have eyes if you think about it. Not really. You don't have physical eyes. So what is sight in the OBE world? That's a whole other thing to think about, but it feels like you're blind when you stumble around, right? And but you might find yourself, he says, in a completely different environment than your bedroom when your vision starts to come back. You may, for example, step out of your own bed and be on top of the Himalayas. Remember? That's where we left off. So despite appearances, until you've engaged visually with your surroundings, don't make any assumptions that you're in your bedroom. Not even when you can feel yourself lying in bed. You're in fact inside of the void, which occurs before the actual manifestation of an out-of-body environment and experience. So this is where things get a little bit exotic, but they're probably more frequent than a lot of people would like to admit. Let's see. Ryan P., a long-time listener. Thanks for listening, man. I appreciate it. Terrence McKenna Trip was thinking the same. So, yeah, this void place is fascinating. So there are many more rare and exotic modes of transitioning out of body, quite the same of popular means of transportation in science fiction movies. It's not something that, like, I know it sounds like I'm making a lot of the stuff up, but I promise you, if I've experienced something, I'm going to tell you. And we can debate on what's real and what's not, but I promise you I've experienced it if I tell you I have. So, he goes on to say that you might also engage in what might be called an environmental transition, which involves the entire dissolution of your environment in the course of the transition process. So rather than you actually moving somewhere, it's the environment around you that's transitioning, eventually leaving you somewhere else, which is a whole other trip. But environmental transitions into the void, though, tend to be very disorienting and are perhaps not recommended to establish the out-of-body state. They interfere with spatial orientation in a rather fundamental manner, and they may even temporarily compromise your ability to think in spatial terms. However, if there was any doubt that you don't have to go through an exit procedure to establish the out-of-body state, consider the following. So here's another journal entry. Now, this is, what I find cool about this guy's journal entries is that this isn't in the 60s or 70s or even the 20s, even though I think those are the best ones. Like Muldoon's book, they need to make a movie about that. That's one of the best OBE books I think we've ever read on this show, ever. So this one's Tuesday, July 4th, 2006. So roughly 19 years ago at 4:10 a.m. And this is when he was talking about how he proceeded to separate several times. And each time he had almost detached, he got pulled back and found himself lying in bed. Then something unexpected happened. He lost all sensations of lying in bed, and the entire environment around him dissolved into thin air. Quite literally, he said, remember that he felt as if the ground had been swept away from underneath him, and he found himself suspended in pure blackness. Can you imagine that? That's never happened to me. But can you imagine, like, you're either in hypnagogia or you're trying to get out of body, and the next thing you know, you're just suspended in blackness. He said, I realized I was in the void, but was utterly disoriented. I was unable to position myself relative to the bed that was there just a few seconds ago. It was a weird situation to be unable to think in spatial terms. I still knew the difference between up, down, left, and right, but I was entirely out of touch with the concept of there where I came from. I continued to mentally struggle for a while, trying to get a hold of the concept of where I came from, and luckily my understanding eventually returned, and once it did not take long for physical awareness to return, and I found myself back in bed. Yeah, and see, that's another thing. We don't really think about this at all. We talk quite literally freely about the spirit world and the metaphysical world so much that, I don't know, it's as if it is reality. I mean, it does make up physical reality, especially here on the earth. Up, down, left, right, north, south, east, west. The whole cube of space thing. Which there's a whole other occult interpretation to that through the Sefer Yetzirah and the tarot. If you guys are following the tarot series, I got to do another video on that. But if we move into the spirit world, the metaphysical realm, there's one, it'd be there's no need for up, down, left, right, all that stuff. There's really not any need for the physical body. So we have to figure out, like, how much of what's happening when we're in the metaphysical is what we're making up so that we can travel through it. Remember that William Buhlman said for years he traveled in a phantom or etheric body until he started getting really good at it. So did Robert Monroe, I think, too. And they became just balls of light eventually. Now, I don't know anybody besides those people that have claimed to become that. I can't become a ball of light. When I get out of body, I still have to have a body. Like, I have to have a body. My mind doesn't comprehend anything else besides spatial terms and like physical awareness, and It's really strange to even think about anything else. But so let's get into some more exotic transitions. These are kind of rare, but if you've had one, please let me know. This one's called an auditory transition. It's an exotic type of transition. Of course, energy sensations of an auditory nature may occur during both, here he goes again, asomatic and parasomatic transitions. Being aware of the body, losing sensation, and just transitioning not in the body. I don't know, asomatic. However, if attention is focused on listening for sound while keeping visual and tactile sensations at bay, you might be able to effectuate a purely auditory transition. This is going to get weird. Like the Twilight Zone, yeah. Monday, November 17th, 2008 at 5:25 a.m. I was lying in bed, hovering near the borderline of sleep. Hypnagogia. It was one of those states of mind in which it seemed easy to move in and out of sleep, but something was slightly different this time. Each time I moved closer to sleep and initiated the process of sensory retraction, there was no vibrations or any other kinds of body sensations. Instead, there was only a metallic screeching sound that got louder and more intense as I moved more deeply into sleep. I continued to move in and out of sleep, manipulating the intensity of the sounds in the process, while wondering why there were no other kinds of energy sensations. Then I realized my attention was fully focused on my head region, as it would be when you try to hear. And I did not pay attention to any other body part, nor did I look into the blackness in front of my eyes. It made sense that I continued... It made sense that only auditory sensations would occur. I continued to complete the transition and intensified the energy sensations until they stopped. And it felt as if all auditory senses had now retracted and outside sounds were blocked off, and for the most part, the only sensation of sound that remained was similar to what you hear when you yawn, and soon that even disappeared. I then moved out of sleep, activating my physical senses once again, and this time, diverting my attention towards the rest of my body. And sure enough, there were no auditory sensations, and all I could feel was a mild sensation of chills across my body. So I'm guessing he's saying that you can get out of body, like lose all of the vibrations, the whole body thing, and this weird, like, metallic transition happened, like the sound. He was able to get out of body, and the only thing that happened was the sound. And he says this: auditory transitions can be very smooth if executed in a controlled manner. Uncontrolled, however, they have the potential to be very disconcerting, especially if the transition is quick and violent. You may be catapulted out of body. Listen, as you guys have heard that, right? Where people just like snap out of body, right? Where they just pop out of body. Or I forget I was reading this. I don't know if I was reading it or listening to it in an audiobook, but I remember somebody talking about they would hear like a pop in their head, and it would just launch them out of body. Now that's freaking weird. I've never had that happen, ever. This is why all this stuff is so weird to me, y'all, because like the only thing that's ever happened for me is just laying there, relaxing, focusing. Usually I'm listening to something, probably HemiSync or binaural beats or an audio guidance thing. I get so relaxed that my body gets kind of paralyzed, but in a relaxing sense. I can't feel it. Then I start to feel the vibrations of the body. And then I transition out. Like none of this weird stuff has happened to me other than the blindness. None of this other stuff has happened though. On rare occasions, he says the focus towards the head region may lead your phantom head to be violently disconnected from the rest of you. The sensation is not unlike that of a flying head, which is eerily reminiscent of being like a guillotine, like your head being cut off. Is this guy still alive? Can you guys, this Frederick Aardema guy? Hell, I wonder if he's going under a pen name, and I've already talked to him. This next one's called sensory bleed through. These are just weird, exotic things that happen. I wouldn't expect them to happen all the time with you, or at all. But this one's called sensory bleed through. A final aspect that deserves mentioning here is sensory bleed through following perceptual engagement into an out-of-body environment. To understand the process, you have to realize that sensory input never completely disappears. It can still exert an influence, even from the farthest margins of consciousness. If sensory information remains below a certain threshold, it does not disturb the out-of-body experience in any noticeable way. Occasionally, however, situations may arise in which sensory input penetrates the out-of-body environment. And he goes on to his next journal thing. Friday, October 6th, 2006, 2:30 a.m. This is so freaking cool, man. I like to get out of body at this time too. Like after the broadcast, when everybody goes to bed, I only see, like, I'll check the Discord and maybe only a few people are awake at that time. But that's when I like to lay down and try to get out of body. It's around 2:30 a.m., 3:30 a.m. And sometimes if I'm feeling, depending on my mood, I'll do it like early in the morning when it's light outside. Y'all said, I'll keep my head, thanks. Yeah, that's weird, man. It's really weird. Okay, so Friday, October 6, 2006 at 2:30 a.m. He said, I had difficulty falling asleep last night, tossing and turning in bed for around 2 hours. Eventually, however, sleep pressure caught up with me, and the vibrations hit me. I rolled out of body easily and stood beside the bed soon after. Fair enough, I do that too. Then, without warning, I suddenly got pulled back in my body. I quickly realized the reason for my premature return. One of the dogs was snoring loudly. I mentally blocked out the sound and was able to induce the vibrations once again. This time, however, instead of rolling out of my body, I floated upwards, turned around in midair, and hovered a couple of feet above the bed looking down. The dogs were lying in between my own body and that of my wife, and one of them was still snoring, lying on her back, obvious or oblivious to my presence. Her snoring did not seem to wake me up this time, but I was concerned that it might do so later on. I moved in more closely and snuggled her belly with my face, and she grunted happily and quieted down soon after. I wondered if she had actually stopped her snoring. However, I did not want to abort the out-of-body experience to find out, so instead, I tried to make my way towards the window. Suddenly, however, I was unable to move. I felt extremely heavy, as if I were trying to walk through the surf, like water. You guys remember me talking about that? What's up, Ari? What's up, brother? But then I received a sudden precept, or a knowing, about how to get out of it. I stretched out my arm sideways and made a pirouette by spinning around the axis of my body. What the hell? Why is he doing that? So that was just something that he does? He just stretches his arms out and starts spinning? Oh, I know how to do this. I'll spin around. Simultaneously, I began to move towards the window, spinning my way towards it, and this seemed to work pretty well. And by the time I'd reached the window, I was able to move normally again. I then remembered an experiment I had planned before this experience, to clap my hands in order to heighten my level of lucidity. I clapped my hands a couple of times, and I could hear the sound loud and clear, and it gave me a nice jolt of lucidity. Next, I flew through the window, but all the hand clapping had left me distracted, and I forgot to focus on what was ahead, beyond the window. Not surprisingly, as soon as I'd gone through it, I ended up directly in the void. There was nothing behind it. And inside the void, I clapped my hands again, strangely, contrary to my expectation, and there was no sound this time. I truly ended up in the void. Oh, damn. So keep in mind that when he went through the window, he had no idea where he was going to go, right? So that's pretty important to do that, to know like where you're going to go. So I think this is why some people end up in the void. But when I got out of body and I was flying around and I told you guys I wanted to go to space, like naturally, I'm not just gonna. That was the first time I got out of body, though. I played in the yard, flew around, and then I was like, well, let's see if we can take it to the limits, right? I'm just gonna fly into space, but I really didn't have a destination or anything like that. So when I got into space, all I saw was blackness, static, and pretty much like what he's talking about, the void. What's weird, though, is when he got there, he tried to do the lucid clap thing again, and he couldn't hear it. That's weird. That's really weird. I wonder what that is, man. Is it really like just a blank construct of consciousness? You guys remember the movie? Like, I know you've seen the movie The Matrix, where they're in like this blank white room, and they got the programmer and they're sending them, guns and all this other stuff. That's what I mean by the void, except it's not white. It's like black. It looks like space. And either you get there accidentally or just by not knowing where you're going to go when you're out of body. So you just end up in this blank place, and you probably aren't going to stay there very long. It's trippy. So he we're talking about exotic modes of transition, okay? So he goes on to another one. Monday, February 12th, 2007, 4:50 a.m. Notice how a lot of these are almost years apart, his journals. And now this is something that I think that we all should be doing. You know how we keep dream journals, right? I think it would be smart. I'm not telling everybody to have 4 or 5 journals, but I think it really would be smart to have it like a separate dream journal and then an OBE journal and then like a magic journal. So if you're doing ceremonies, rituals, prayers, meditations, whatever you're trying to do, and just kind of keep them separate. Because if you put it all in one big fat journal, things can get jumbled up. But at least for me, if I kept, probably not going to do this, but it's an idea. If I had like 3 separate journals, especially one for OBE stuff, I bet you my mind would pick up on parallels better. So, 4:50 a.m., February 12th, 2007. That's today, actually. But 18 years ago. I woke up with a firm intent to project and quickly began to feel for the vibrations. And the vibrations came on strong. But I managed to relax sufficiently for my body to fall asleep. And soon, at a high pitch, I gently floated upward without having had any intent to do so. At the same time, the bedroom environment faded from view, and I found myself floating in the void. I continued to float aimlessly for a while, postponing any intent to go anywhere. My lack of ambition seemed to result in a sensation of falling deeper into the void below me. I did not resist it despite some trepidation about the idea of going down. I kept falling into the void. Streaks of blue occasionally surrounded me. I did not seem to get anywhere, however, and eventually I decided it was time to engage. I moved from my inert horizontal position into an upward position and began to feel for the ground under my feet. There was a hard surface, and before I knew it, I stood in the middle of a dark environment. I had not yet engaged visually, and I was still partially inside the void. I peered into the pitch-dark surroundings, hoping this would trigger my vision, but it remained completely dark. I then began to walk anyway, blind to my surroundings. And this seemed to help my vision, and then a large green field appeared around me. It was still rather dark, and twilight had almost ended to make way for an evening sky. What I could see in the distance was something that looked like a farm or a compound. The building was surrounded by a high fence made of barbed wire. Intrigued, I decided to get a closer look. However, as soon as I began to walk, I found myself unable to move. My left foot was pinned to the ground. I looked down. There was nothing there that I could see. So I jerked forward, but it was useless. I could not move my foot, as if an invisible force kept it firmly in place. I woke up a few seconds later and became aware of a pressure against my left foot. The dog had draped its paws on top of my foot, pressing down on it intermittently while stretching its paws. Wow. So a related phenomenon to sensory bleed through is the sensation of having a hitchhiker on your back. You feel someone or something clamped around your body, ready to go along for the ride. This may occur inside the void or even while in an out-of-body environment. It may also occur during the transition process when you have a sense that someone is lying below or beside you in bed. This isn't something to fear. It is merely the sensation of your physical body in the background of your awareness, bleeding into your experience in a distorted format. The best course of action is to simply ignore it, because interaction will only increase the hold that the hitchhiker has on you. Never heard of that. First time I've ever heard of that. Hitchhiker. Yeah, that's a synchro. No, I didn't do it on purpose. I don't read ahead or anything. Man, you guys, listen. Do you remember when Monroe had those little bitty kid things that latched onto him? It's in his first book. And by the way, if you're still listening to this show and you haven't read, I would say get the audiobook. It's so much better, man. Get the audiobook, Journeys Out of the Body, and listen to it carefully. Fascinating, right? So in that book, though, he had these like hitchhikers is what this guy's calling it, I guess, but these little kids that he described in a weird way. He said they were kind of small and lanky looking, but they also like barely had any hair on them, as if they were just barely hitting puberty or something. I don't know. That's how he described them. But they would latch onto him, and the more he tried to peel them off, the more that they would like squeeze onto him or tighten up. That's crazy. Maybe Frederick Ardema is explaining what happened to Monroe. So at any point in time, yeah, just ignore the creepy hitchhiker, right? If you feel things locking onto you, grabbing you, holding you, or squeezing you even, what this guy's theory is, I don't know if it's a fact, but he's stating it like it's a fact, is that the senses of your body are bleeding through to the OBE experience. That's all it is. So you're free from the body, but somehow there's bleed through of the body or sensory input, and that sensory input is causing you to create characters, I guess. But that don't make any sense, because these things that latched onto Monroe, and maybe it's something different, I don't know. These things that latched onto him, the more he fought them, the tighter they got. And that's what this guy's saying. He's saying that's what happens. But what happened is that Robert Monroe got so desperate and so scared that he hit his knees crying and begging for help because these things wouldn't let him go. It was really scary when you listen to the audiobook. And then some guy, and you'll find out who this guy is later if you continue to read his books, but some guy in a hooded figure came over him and helped him and just, peeled those little beings off of him like it was nothing. So this is where things get really weird, right? So what does it really mean to be out of the body? Does it mean that we construct ourselves to be out of the body, that we adopt a different perceptual perspective towards the world and ourselves? Ardema says such a perspective is not necessarily any less real than the perspective we adopt when we construct ourselves to be in our bodies. Neither situation, that's a trip to think about, but neither situation in terms of the constructive abilities of a non-local consciousness is fundamentally different from the other. Because our position and perception of being inside our body is a construction created by our own consciousness. There's also nothing actually leaving the physical body. After all, you can't leave something that you're not really inside of anyways. Therefore, all that is required to establish the out-of-body state is to get up out of bed once the process of sensory retraction has been completed. That's exactly right, man. It really is that easy. Once you don't feel your body anymore, like once the body's gone, just keep moving. Get out of bed. You can try to leave what appears to be your physical body, but you would be trying to leave a body image that is already free of physical limitations. The manner in which consciousness is able to construct and experience itself at locations different from that of the body is wide and varied, including exotic modes of transitioning, such as what we talked about, or the dissolution of external environments, or whatever, or auditory transitions. However, we can identify two major pathways leading into the out-of-body state. And here's his phrases for them. This is funny because Muldoon had phrases for them too. Parasomatic and asomatic. The parasomatic and asomatic transition involve a reduction in sensory input. That's it. As the body falls asleep, we reduce our sensory input. During a parasomatic transition, you maintain body awareness, while in a asomatic transition, there's no body awareness. In either scenario, you'll eventually experience yourself as separate from the location of the physical body. So once the physical senses have fully disengaged, you may encounter the void, a minimum perceptual environment. That's the void. In the case of a parasomatic transition, you will typically find yourself in bed with darkness surrounding you. In the case of an asomatic transition, you will find your mind floating in darkness. In either of these situations, a new perceptual environment may be entered, the out-of-body environment. There's a diagram that he has here, but that's really crazy. Okay, so now we got two theories. You remember when we were talking about what Muldoon called our etheric body, our etheric consciousness? So the thing that is actually keeping you conscious, the thing that is actually aware, is this kind of, according to Muldoon, this etheric being. Without it, your body would just be like jelly. It wouldn't work. You could shock it with electricity, even send impulses from the brain to the arms or whatever, but it doesn't do things the way we do while this body's working. So that thing, according to Muldoon, is really who we are. And all we have to do to have an OBE experience is have the body shut down, and that thing that we really are, we just keep moving. In fact, the thing that's awake right now, listening to what I'm saying, isn't anything having to do with the fleshy parts of your physical body. Nothing. It's actually some kind of energy or etheric energy that exists while this body is alive, according to Muldoon. So to separate, you don't even have to worry about consciousness or awareness. All you have to do is have the body shut down or get to a certain state of where the body's not working. What Frederick is saying is that all you have to do, he's kind of saying the same thing, but he's saying all you have to do is get away from sensory input. Think about this. This is why the sensory deprivation tanks work so well. People lay in those tanks, and once they start to lose their senses, their feeling and all this other stuff, once they begin to lose their senses, some people freak out. I mean, I've read articles about it, man, where some people just start freaking out and they run, they get out of the tank or whatever. Other people start to have, quote, psychedelic experiences because their consciousness isn't related to the physical body at all. Think about it. Your consciousness never really stops. The thing is you don't remember your dreams. That's all. You just don't remember and I know what some people are thinking, like, well, what about when you go under like anesthesia or whatever? Well, I don't have an answer for that. But I do know that my consciousness exists quite separate at a lot of times from this physical body. Even when I'm asleep, my consciousness is doing things in the dream world that I have no inclination that it's not real. And even when I become lucid, right, and I'm in a dream, it's still pretty real. I still can feel things like pain and experience all this other stuff, yet my physical body's not there, right? So the question is, where is consciousness, right? It's not located where we think it is. A lot of times we think it's like inside our head because right now it's connected to our bodies and we're taking all these sensations in. I don't think it is at all. I don't think it's inside of anything. But there is a parallel between both texts, right? Now we know that to have an OBE isn't really that difficult as far as understanding it. All we have to do is stay conscious or aware and allow the physical part of ourselves to go away. So if the body falls asleep, we don't fall asleep. We just let the body fall asleep. If we want to lay in a sensory deprivation tank and just chill until we start to lose all sensory input, we can do that. Sometimes we might find ourselves out of body after the body fell asleep and we retracted from a dream. But according to this guy, Frederick, you might find yourself in the void. Once the physical senses have fully disengaged all the way, you may encounter the void, which is, quote, a minimal perceptual environment. I'm sure that freaks people out too. But all right, so hopefully everybody understands that, right? I'm looking into the chat room on the Discord, and I don't see any comments about alien code. So maybe my mind I'd see a lot of thumbs up or stuff, but what do you guys, I'm just going to put the question in the Discord. What do you think about the conversation the alien had at the end? I don't want to spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen it. There we go. I'll start the conversation. So we're at the top of the hour. When we come back, we're going to talk about projecting into the physical field. Keep in mind that during many out-of-body experiences, lots of the environments you encounter will resemble the physical world. This is another thing that I love to talk about because I want to be a ghost. And the times that I have had OBE experiences, like the really, really good ones, I have them all the time, but the really, really good ones, the ones where you separate from the body, you can see yourself laying there, you're in your bedroom or you're in your yard, ready to move, like those OB experiences. It feels so real. It's more real than what I'm saying now. It's like being a ghost. But the question is, are we really in the physical realm? I don't know. I hope we are. I hope that we are. I'd like to think that we are because it's cool to think that. But maybe this Frederick guy's going to burst my bubble. So we got to pay for the music licensing on the Fringe FM. Also, please support the show if you can. We'll be right back.
Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Have you ever wondered, what do the stars say for me? Or, will the next month or the next year be more favorable? How about, are our two signs compatible? Each month, at the new moon, you can ask these questions live with me, your astrologer psychic, Mary DeCina, along with host of Lighting the Void, Joe Root. Join us at the new moon for Cosmic Conditions. We look forward to working with your energies.
Every new moon at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on Fringe FM. right, welcome back to Lighting the Void. I know it's weird to keep hearing those same kind of like forced commercials, all that stuff, but those are file drops, just so everybody knows. So when someone's listening, it's the same, it's got some kind of trigger thing in there. I don't know how to explain it, but if someone's listening on the radio station side of things, it's always some advertisement. But if they're not, if you're listening like on YouTube or whatever, it's usually like a public service announcement. It's very weird. All right. So we're going to talk about getting out of body in the physical realm. So during many out of body experiences, you experience the environment. It seems like the physical world. You encounter, to me, it is the physical world. But he says this is especially the case following a parasomatic transition. So when you actually feel the paralysis in your body and then you get out of body, you're going to end up in what seems to be the same environment. It is, but to me it is. But let's see what he says. So it'll be like, in which your own bedroom environment usually appears at the end of the transition process. And so from there, you can explore your neighborhood, your town, your city where you live, or you can try to venture out further and visit, I don't know, the pyramids, the Rocky Mountains, all that stuff, the Amazon, even go to outer space if those destinations interest you. Now, some traditional approaches argue that these kinds of out-of-body experiences are exactly as they seem. That's how I approach it. But namely that you're roaming the physical world as if you were a ghost. They claim that the projector is unable to manipulate any objects because the person occupies a ghostly form that moves straight through objects and matter. Well, I hate to tell this guy this because I think I know where he's going with this, but not everybody has claimed not to be able to do things in the physical world. I have. I've been able to affect the physical world. For a fact. So is Robert Monroe. Let's see what he says. Because some people never experience that, so they think something else is going on. They claim that the projector is unable to manipulate any objects because you're in a ghost body. You're invisible to other people in the out-of-body state, unable to interact with the living. Now, on the surface, this seems straightforward enough, but it doesn't fit very well with the actual experience. You'll be able to manipulate objects in the out-of-body state. There we go. So he's saying you will be able to manipulate objects in the out-of-body state. Damn, that's exciting. I'm sitting here telling you guys right now, in full, vulnerable, whatever you want to call it, that you can get out of body. I know for a fact, become a ghost, and affect the physical world. Probably won't be a very popular point of view, and a lot of people are going to think I'm schizophrenic, crazy, and stuff for a long, long time until we evolve enough. And then we'll all be dead and gone, and people will be talking about us. Oh, you remember that old thing called YouTube and the podcast world? And they had all these people talking about OBEs, and everybody thought they were crazy back then. Yeah. So, let's see. So he says, you will be able to manipulate objects in the out-of-body state. This includes opening doors and windows, all, of course, without any real effort on the physical world. Likewise, you're often visible to people you encounter in the out-of-body state. None of this fits the idea of occupying the physical world as a ghost, though. These inconsistencies have led some to argue that the OBE does not take place in the actual physical world. Rather, it's proposed that these types of OBEs occur somewhere between the physical and non-physical dimensions, and some kind of buffer zone. The notion of a buffer zone ties in, of course, with the theosophical claim of what's called astral matter, directly underlying the physical world, a more fluid layer of matter than dense physical matter. So, for example, when picking up an object in the out-of-body state, you're not actually picking up the physical object, but rather its astral counterpart. The fluidity of astral matter is also often blamed for so-called perceptual distortions or reality fluctuations in the out-of-body state. For example, you'll often find that the out-of-body environment is to deviate from ordinary physical reality, such, for example, let's say the layout of furniture in a bedroom, or the absence of objects that should be there but they're not, or the occurrence of events that didn't actually take place in physical reality. Metaphorically speaking, the idea of an astral buffer zone is not entirely incorrect. However, from a non-local perspective, any attempt to blame a particular location for inconsistencies is ultimately mistaken. Perceptual distortions have very little to do with any inherent characteristics of the environment itself, or, the fluidity of the astral matter. If you read theosophical texts, or even a lot of occult texts, they talk about the astral light, or the astral matter, or the astral fluid. Right? So rather, the question is whether you're able to construct physical reality in matter that closely resembles ordinary perception, which is an act performed by your own consciousness. So, such a perspective, phenomena such as opening doors, handling objects in the out-of-body state are not really inconsistencies or distortions at all. They indicate a more accurate reflection of physical reality than the ability to walk through walls. I wonder what he thinks this is. Where we are right now. Hold on a second, I got something in my throat. Where we are right now, this subject that we're talking about right now, to me, is the most fascinating side of this whole thing. To me. It's cool to be able to get out of body. But there's a lot of people that say that, oh, it's all in your mind, or it's some kind of construct of your mind, or it's not real, or even science says it's some kind of psychological thing. But I know for a fact, that I've affected physical reality. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of work and practice. So I know if someone was to put me on the spot and say, all right, Joe, get out of body and go open the door or knock on wood or something. I don't know if I could do that with that kind of pressure, but I know that I have done it. But just by doing this kind of stuff alone, working at the house, that kind of thing. Anyways, I don't want to stray from this too much. So is there some kind of weird buffer zone when we're in the out of body state? He goes, so instead of a buffer zone, it would be more correct to refer to it as a field of consciousness made up of your own constructions of physical reality. I use the term field not to automatically imply an adherence to quantum physical notions of consciousness, although obviously the connection may be made. You may also quite simply think of it as a physically orientated state of consciousness or a mode of consciousness that is focused on the physical world. The exact same mode of consciousness would apply when you occupy so-called objective reality. The only difference lies in the absence of sensory input in the out-of-body state. Interesting. This is really fucking interesting, man. Ideally, with sensory input taken out of the equation, the environment you construct is the same as physical reality. This is indeed quite often the case in the initial stages of the OBE, such as when you're in your bedroom immediately following separation. However, sensory input does not contribute significantly in maintaining environmental stability. Without it, the ability of your consciousness to construct physical reality in an accurate manner, especially over prolonged periods of time, is not all guaranteed. Keep in mind that we're not even talking about projecting into an environment without any prior knowledge and then trying to perceive it in an accurate manner. We're only talking about those situations in which you are already familiar with your surroundings before embarking on an OBE. You often even know what your perception is incorrect. You know that your perception is incorrect, and yet you still perceive it differently. So what is really happening here? What makes perception so unstable that it may only show a remote resemblance to actual physical reality? Wow. Okay, so now I didn't pay total attention to every minute detail. But here's what I'm going to say again and again and again and again to drive this home. When I have the best OBE experiences, nothing changes as far as my perception. Nothing as far as like what I'm seeing, how I don't know how to explain it, how I'm taking in reality, what it feels like right now while you're hearing these very words is what a full-fledged OBE feels like, seems like, looks like, even sounds like. Actually, it's a bit quieter as far as I'm concerned with sound, but have I really studied every little detail? Probably not. But I saw no difference between my bedrooms, my house, than I do now. But if we really get kind of nerdy about it and we look into science, right, the whole wave and particle thing in the quantum world, and it's not really that hard to understand, you know, if you look into what it really means and what it is. Consciousness is creating and observing at a rate faster than light, right? So it seems as if we're in a place that's already here, but consciousness is kind of just observing a creation simultaneously. That's all it's doing. Because we're inside these avatars or physical bodies, physical reality is really consistent. That's what he's saying. Over time, it's really consistent. The laws of nature and physical reality are super consistent because we're in these bodies, in these avatars, right? But when we get out of body, there are inconsistencies. But it doesn't mean that you can't affect the physical realm. In fact, he's saying that you can. So here's why there's failures, according to Frederick Ardema, in the reconstruction of physical reality. The majority of threats to environmental stability almost always originate from within, not the actual environment. So broadly speaking, and with considerable overlap between them, the threats to stable perception in the physical field can be categorized as this: the externalization of the inner psyche, the remote representation, faltering cognitive functions, displacement, perceptual collapse, and atmospheric influences. So let's look at all those. This is going to get super nerdy, but it's fascinating to me. The externalization of the inner psyche. What does that mean? This refers to those instances in which the mental content of your own mind finds itself manifested in the out-of-body environment as external objects, events, people, etc. These include memories, transient thoughts and emotions, hopes and fears, each of which can manifest in the environment surrounding you. For example, if you're in a good mood, that might translate as a bright, sunny day, even while in reality it's dark outside. Likewise, a spiritual attitude may lead to the appearance of a church down the street, while fear may manifest as a boogeyman out to get you. Many projectors fail to notice the relationship between their psyche and the environment, especially under conditions of fear. And this is unfortunate, since a failure to recognize the relationship between the content of the personal psyche and the external environment may lead the projector to treat manifestations of their psyche as actual danger. And we do this all the time. Hell, I've done this. You guys remember when I was in that false awakening and I saw that entity, and some of you have told me stories about things. That's our inner fear projecting into things that we think are separate from us, but they're really not. Not really. Luckily, lucidity is usually compromised under these circumstances, insulating the projector from a potentially traumatic experience. So usually we can escape without getting too traumatized. One of the reasons that the externalization of the inner psyche can be difficult to recognize is that these manifestations are not solely the result of immediate thoughts and concerns. For example, with some awareness of the mechanisms involved, most people would probably make the connection between a conscious wish to interact with someone and subsequently noticing a person walking in your direction. Now, obviously, the connection between the wish and what's actually occurring isn't a coincidence. However, the externalization of the inner psyche also includes the manifestations of thoughts you had during the day. For example, a fleeting worry about having forgotten to lock the front door before going to sleep may bleed into an out-of-body experience in which you find someone breaking into your house as if they were an actual robber. You may not even remember having had that thought, let alone make the connection with the manifestation of that worry in the out-of-body state. Muldoon talked about this too, right? Even more difficult to recognize are more stable and structural aspects of your inner psyche finding their way into the OBE environment. Another example of this would be a persistent belief in danger can lead to manifestations in the out-of-body environment that confirm this belief. This problem is further compounded by the fact that structural aspects of the psyche often manifest in a remote and symbolic format. It is one thing to be able to recognize a boogeyman as a manifestation of your own belief system, but it's quite another to interpret, for example, the meaning of prehistoric birds or dancing elephants in your neighborhood. Externalization of the inner psyche into the environment sometimes coincides with a loss of lucidity. However, this is by no means always the case. It's possible to construct an entirely imaginary scenario originating from your own psyche without losing lucidity. Nonetheless, do expect loss of lucidity and awareness to occur now and then, especially when you become heavily immersed in events surrounding you and fail to recognize the bizarre events. There's such a simpler way to say all that. I'll say it like this. To me, there's a simple way. So when you're in your physical body, all of the thoughts and fears and even the things, the programs, all of the stuff that you have in your unconscious, like all of this stuff is just in your mind, right? Like it's just in your psyche. And even when you forget about it and you start focusing on something else, those things are still there. Now, when you leave your physical body, like when your consciousness leaves the avatar, you can definitely project things into this realm and not know it. Here's an example, okay? This is where it gets really cool, but it also gets really, really strange. But understand that all of this helps us to understand consciousness, okay? Okay, so let's say I left my house and I went to your house and I did a perfect out-of-body experience. I went to your house. I said, oh, you know, what's Ryan up to? What's he doing? Now, Ryan may be outside doing something. Let's say, for example, he's flying a kite with his kid or something. When I get there, I see Ryan and I see his kid playing outside or whatever. But he's not flying a kite. He's actually flying a drone or an airplane. Now, for some reason, whatever's going on in my mind can witness, like I'm connected to everybody in that sense. I can see Ryan and his child playing or whatever, but there's something in my mind that shows it being a drone. I wasn't even thinking about drones that day, but for the past 3 weeks, we've been talking about drones and all of these things and whatever. Now, so this is the kind of like what he's talking about, buffer zone of consciousness. If I was in my body and I was in my perceptive avatar in this physical body, if I was to visit Ryan, okay, I would see the kite. My body would interpret things accurately on this physical domain. But because I'm in the OBE state, I'm in a different conscious state. I'm interpreting what's going on, but also creating it too. The mind's creating it. And because I'm not in this body, in my senses, there's some slippage. I can create things, right? Like, instead of seeing the kite, I see a drone, which could be a fear of mine, like an unconscious fear. I have a fear of drones. Now, the same thing happened to Robert Monroe. Okay. And I figured this out. In Robert's book, he talked about playing cards. There was a place in his book where he called it the knowing, where every now and then you just have an intuitive thing where you knew stuff. So he's playing cards with his buddies, and he knew what the cards were going to be just for a little bit. Now, keep in mind, that's later in the book. So what I'm saying is Robert Monroe thinks about playing cards a lot. Now, in the beginning of the book, before that chapter, he travels to his neighbor's house. He gets out of body. He goes to his neighbor's house, and his kid's there. Like, they got kids at the table. The guy's wife's there. And he sees his wife handing out playing cards at the table. Now, he didn't put this together in his book, but I'm putting this together based on what Frederick's saying here. So he's seeing the wife hand out playing cards at the table. So he actually did go there consciously when he was out of body. He did witness everyone sitting at the table, and he did witness his friend's wife handing out playing cards or something. But when he called his friend and asked him, what were you doing? What was happening at the table? He didn't even tell them he was getting out of body the way. He just said, hey, tell me what was going on at this time. She was handing the mail out to the table. So that's the difference, right? It's not that we're not a ghost. It's that when we're in this like OBE body, we can project things into this whatever realm, right? So in his physical body, if he'd have went to his friend's house while he's in this realm of perception, in this avatar, in this being of sensory input, he would have saw the mail. He would have seen it exactly as they saw it. But when he got out of body, he saw what was going on. The mind created, but it observed something that was kind of stuck in the back of his unconscious, which is playing cards. So as soon as she started handing out the mail, his astral mind or whatever was like interpretation, playing cards. Right? It's really weird. It's very weird, but that's what's going on. So it isn't that we can't affect the physical realm. This is why these experiments are hard to work with, right? Because if someone says, all right, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to go hide something in a room, and I want you to go get that thing or look at it and tell me what it is. This gets a little difficult. We can do it with remote viewing, actually. But when we do like the OBE thing, we can leave our bodies, go into the room, but what we may perceive may not actually be what is there because we're not in these sensory input avatars. We're in a different state of consciousness that's moving in a different way. It's creating and observing super fast, and we're taking our psyches with us too, if that makes sense. You have to think about that. Here's his example. Okay, it gets bizarre too. So this journal entry, Friday, August 11th, 2006, 2:10 a.m. This was my second out-of-body state of the night. After the last one, I failed an experiment. I had briefly gone downstairs to get some juice, and on my way back upstairs, I noticed the back door to the garden had been left unlocked. This was not good since there have been a couple of break-ins in the neighborhood recently. So after locking the door, I went back to bed. It didn't take long for the vibrations to start again. I had not intended to project out of body again, but the opportunity was there, so I took it. So I separated from my body. My lucidity was rather poor right from the start. I felt a little paranoid and stressed. I quickly moved my way downstairs, this time out of body, and looked out the window. And sure enough, there was a car driving into the driveway with two unsavory-looking characters inside them. I didn't question the reality of it. I accepted it as a real danger. It looked like a home invasion. I went into the kitchen and grabbed one of the knives. The doorbell rang. I thought this was odd since burglars usually don't ring doorbells. I carefully walked to the front door, knife in hand, and looked through the small window next to the door. And to my surprise, there were 2 people with colorful balloons in their hand. I heard music coming from outside, and then I awoke soon after. What the hell? You see how our psyches can affect that? Our fears and our psyches. So this is why when people have like NDEs, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but some people they take all of their beliefs, their addictions, and everything that's affecting their psyche into the astral realm. It's not that they're not perceiving each other. We can perceive each other, but psyches can clash, or you can create whole senses realities, heaven, hell, all kinds of different things. But if you're open to, like if you don't just fall into a belief and you're open to conscious exploration, you'll get to witness all of this or experience all of it. Here's another journal entry too. So now, well, before we get into the next one, see how his psyche kind of messed with that? So he tried to get out of the body. He couldn't. So he went downstairs to get some juice. He noticed the back door was unlocked. That's it. So all that was really happening in this physical reality was that the back door was left unlocked. But that was enough to bury into his unconscious, that little fear buried into his unconscious and into his consciousness. But fears are usually deeply buried anyways. So it probably tickled a fear of being broke into. So when he went out of body again the second time, same thing, except his mind created people pulling into the driveway, knocking on the door, all this kind of stuff. And then the other part of his psyche was like, oh, it's not even a home invader. It's some kid with balloons or somebody with balloons or whatever. That's how weird this stuff can get. Was he actually in his kitchen? That's the question. Did he actually go downstairs in a ghost body and in the same kitchen that our physical bodies would have been in if we were in his kitchen? That's the big question. For me, anyways. All right, here's another journal entry. Saturday, April 4th, 2009 at 9:45 a.m. I was moving in and out of sleep this morning. Monique had already gotten up. I guess that's his wife. I knew she was busy working downstairs on the computer in the kitchen. It was tax time for her business, so I felt a little bit guilty lying in bed, as we all do. Don't we all feel a little guilty? I know I do. When someone else is working and doing something and I'm not doing shit, I always feel a little guilty. After hovering around the borderline of sleep for a while, I felt a vibrational pattern emerging. I had not intended to project, but given the opportunity, I decided to try. That's how I am too, man. Like if I start to feel vibrations, if they happen, I'm going to try to get out of body every single time. I was fairly deep in already, and after I let myself slide into sleep, the vibrations intensified. Wanting to do a small experiment, I then partially rolled out of body. Half of me was inside my body while the other half was out. Next, I moved my physical hand across the sheet, which felt as would be expected. I then did the same thing with my phantom hand, and there was barely any noticeable difference. Except that the movement with the phantom hand felt slightly more fluid and less defined. Satisfied that it was possible to move physically, even when partially separated, I completed the separation and made my way downstairs. I was vigilant about the occurrence of any distortions in the process. Everything was it was supposed to be until I got to the kitchen. The kitchen was in disarray. Clothes were all over the floor, some of them still needing to be washed and others needing to be ironed. The ironing board stood ready in the middle of the kitchen. I very much doubted that Monique was doing laundry at the time and felt slightly disappointed to not be perceiving things more correctly. I woke up soon after. After I went downstairs, I found out that the kitchen was indeed in disarray, but not with any laundry. Instead, there was paperwork everywhere from Monique working on her taxes, and apparently I got the laundry mixed up with paperwork. This made sense, because I'm more likely to feel guilty about her doing laundry than her own taxes of her own business. Bingo. There it is. Do you guys get what, I mean, do you guys get what I'm saying here? Right? So he took his psyche into reality. So he took his astral makeup, his astral self, into reality. The only reason why he didn't see papers and he saw laundry instead was because his psyche already felt guilty. Remember, he said, I felt guilty because she was doing taxes and I'm laying in bed. I wasn't doing shit. So his psyche created a reality based on that feeling of guilt. He did experience the wife being in the kitchen, everything that the kitchen is. He was probably actually there in some form, and even in a ghost form. But his, maybe a ghost form, I don't know. But his observation took in the laundry needed to be done. There's an ironing board in the middle of the kitchen. This is something that he can actually help with, which makes his guilt real. Now, if you think about that, right, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn real quick. When we get into things like vibrational manifestation and all this stuff, if the astral environment is indeed the blueprints of what comes into our reality, like Neville Goddard says, and all these people that say, you know, as a man thinketh, right? That's what your reality becomes. If that's the case, if he didn't feel, let's say, for example, he didn't feel guilty at all, what would he have saw? Nothing. I wonder if he would have seen the taxes, the papers, if he didn't take that guilt in there with him. And it's like what I think the astral is a place that we can move in, all that stuff. But it's also like this place of creation before it becomes physically real. I hope that makes sense. This is why I love the Tree of Life and all that stuff, because the Hermetic Tree of Life, it's not, look, the Tree of Life isn't the reality model. It isn't ultimate reality. It isn't explaining some secret truths or anything. It's just a tool based on how energy comes into manifestation, how creation comes into manifestation, and so on. And it's like a model that we created based on our experiences of meditation and all this other stuff. And according to the tree, that all makes sense. But I still question, like, we haven't got into, let's say, for instance, if he wanted to affect the physical realm in his astral form. And I hope we get there before the show ends, though. Now, he gets into remote representation and perceptual degradation. Remote representation is one of the strongest destabilizing influences in the out-of-body state. Now, this happens when, for example, furniture is out of place and familiar objects are absent. Walls have been rearranged themselves, and entire rooms are different in locations inside your house. Your perceptions are still reminiscent of the original, yet not quite the same. A more remote version of it. This often co-occurs with externalization of the inner psyche, in which your perception is not only remote, but is also symbolic of your state of mind. Just like the previous journal entry that we read. Remote perception can come about quite suddenly and unexpectedly in the out-of-body state. For example, you may be running down the street, and as you pick up speed, abruptly find yourself driving a motorcycle on the interstate. Often such incidences are accompanied by perceptual degradation, with the environment no longer being perceived as vividly as before. Everything suddenly starts to look a little bleak and washed out. Dude, that's happened to me. Not the motorcycle thing, but what he's talking about, that everything was so real, and then all of a sudden things got kind of, I say blurry, but yeah, washed out. Now, when this occurs, expect a significant loss in your overall level of lucidity and alertness. You will have entered a subjective reality of your own making, a dreaming state of consciousness. This is what happens when you're in the OBE I guess, vibration or state, and you start to slip into a lucid dream. Things get blurry. It's weird. By definition, you're still in the out-of-body state, experiencing yourself as located elsewhere than your physical body, but under these circumstances, very little of what you will perceive has anything to do with physical reality. This may already occur during the transition process itself before you actually become part of a regular out-of-body environment. Here's a journal entry that kind of explains it. Now, this one, he doesn't have a date and time. It just says early 2000s, date and time unknown. I awoke with energy sensations. I was lucid but quite drowsy and tired. Still, I proceeded to relax my awareness in order to intensify the energy sensations. He's talking about the vibratory state, so he can increase it. It didn't take long for my mind to slip into a semi-lucid state. Thought became incoherent, and I had moved too fast. And for a short while, I was able to hold on to a sliver of lucidity, but I soon lost it altogether and started dreaming. I found myself inside the basement of my house. Large wooden beams and slabs of concrete were suspended above me, blocking my way upward. It looked like a total mess. Yet nothing about this felt strange to me. I felt I needed to get past those beams, and I was still in the process of leaving my body. I struggled and wiggled my body through the narrow openings in between the wooden beams. Meanwhile, water coming from above was crushing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. I felt as if I was drowning as I started struggling to reach higher ground, and it was too much. The fear of drowning was strong enough to wake me up. That's trippy. The next journal entry, same thing, mid-2000s, date and time unknown. He says, I woke up several times last night. Each time, I immediately felt for the vibrations. It took a while, but early morning I was finally able to shift into the hypnagogic state of sleep with relative ease. There were no vibrations, perhaps because I was not lucid enough, but I managed to let my body fall asleep as my mind slid through the cracks. I was soon flying down the street. The familiar tall oak trees lined up on both sides, and it was summer. The branches of the trees formed a canopy of foliage as I whisked by underneath. I would have appreciated it more if I'd been fully lucid, but all I could think of was to make sure not to hit any of the branches. Suddenly, the environment shifted, and I lost any remaining lucidity. I found myself in the cockpit of a jet plane, struggling to control the rudder to the best of my ability. I worried that the wingtips would hit the tree branches. I continued to fly below the trees for a while, not questioning the situation until it finally occurred to me that something strange had just happened. Why was I frantically trying to fly a jet plane through the trees? I woke up before I had the chance to answer my own question. You see how he's slipping into different states of awareness? Like when you lose. Let's think about it this way, right? Whether we're in the body, out of the body, it doesn't matter. There's like awareness, the awareness that we have now. Then there's hypnagogia, where we're slipping in and out of like sleep or dream states. Then there's lucidity while we're out of body. We're lucid, we're aware, but we're not quite in the dream state. And then there's the dream state, where we're so deep and into unconsciousness that we're in a whole separate reality and some type of fantasy state that our psyches are controlling the whole thing. Still seems kind of real, but it's a dream state. It's not the same thing. This is kind of crazy that you can be in your body and out of body, but these states that I just talked about, you can be in any of those states at all times. Okay, December 28th, 2007. Here's another one at 3:05 a.m. Same kind of thing we're talking about. He said, I had a disappointing out-of-body experience last night. I easily triggered the energy sensations, but whatever mental clarity I started with was gone soon after. Initially, it felt as if I was lying in my own bed, but the environment soon shifted, and instead I was lying in a bunk somewhere with other people sleeping around me. I got out of the bunk and made my way to a doorway at the end of the room. This was all quite robotic and dreamy. I was going through the motions of an OBE without really knowing what I was doing. Behind the door, I found a staircase, as is the case in our real house, but it did not lead toward the garden door. Instead, There was no end to the stairs, and each time I descended one level, there was another one. Luckily, I was sufficiently lucid to recognize the repetitive pattern. I held the firm intention to perceive a door leading outside as soon as I reached the next level going down, and indeed, there was a door when I arrived at the next level. I opened it, but to my surprise, there was no back garden, as there should have been. Instead, right in front of me was an airfield. I was surprised I'd never expected an airfield at the other end. This I know this sounds crazy, guys, but like this happens a lot. I don't know if any of you like Grant or who does get out of body quite a bit. Once you start having lots of OBEs and getting out of body a lot, this is the next phase of training your consciousness, right? Because I mean, it's hard enough when we train ourselves to stay in certain states of awareness, the OBE realm, lucidity, etc. But once we figure that out, then once we start getting out of body, those states kind of start faltering back and forth too, and it's hard to control sometimes. It gets tough. So he says this is called faltering cognitive functions. So occasionally, mental faculties will falter in the out-of-body state. For example, loss of memory may suddenly occur. Under these circumstances, you're likely to misconstrue the environment. Even if the anomaly is recognized, you still won't be able to correct the environment since you don't remember what it's supposed to look like. So memory is clearly important in the accurate reconstruction of physical reality. It also has been implicated in maintaining lucidity. Without proper recall of waking life, lucidity is likely to be compromised. Interestingly, however, lucidity does not always degrade with an inability to remember aspects of your waking life. You can be entirely lucid during such circumstances, as long as you're aware of the fact that you fail to remember. For example, if you can't remember what your neighborhood is supposed to look like, and yet you're aware of the fact that you failed to remember it correctly, your level of lucidity will not be threatened. It will only be threatened if you fail to recognize the anomaly. That makes sense, but I'm hoping that makes sense to you guys too. Incomplete access to waking memory does, however, almost always coincide with an inaccurate reconstruction of the physical field of consciousness. Here's an example. Tuesday, May 15th, 2007, 4:10 a.m. I had a couple of out-of-body experiences last night, and the last one was interesting, as I was preparing for an experiment. The experiment required me to feel for a hidden object inside of a box on the nightstand. I decided on some preliminary practice involving pushing my hand through the box. I had no problem doing that, except that I saw right through the solid box as I pushed my hand through it. In any case, I experienced no difficulty pushing my hand through the box, so I decided to do something else. This time, I wanted to ensure that the environment outside would be entirely similar to the physical environment in real life. However, as I set that intent on my way toward the window, I had a great deal of difficulty remembering what our house looked like from the outside. I tried imagining several different houses, hoping one of them would trigger the correct memory, but none of them did. All the while, I experienced no problems being lucid. Eventually, I gave up and decided to go outside, and I jumped through the window, walked up the street, and turned around to see what the house looked like. The walls were made of thick wooden beams that provided a framework of smaller slats of wood. I knew that looked nothing like our real house, but the next moment, I promptly remembered what our house looked like. So his lack of memory triggered a memory. You see what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be crazy to really understand that consciousness is so first off, let's forget the body and either we're in the body or out of the body, whatever. Let's forget about that. Let's just talk about consciousness. Okay. Thomas Campbell defined consciousness as simply an awareness that has a choice. That's it. That's what consciousness is to him. But what's happening in our reality isn't just awareness with a choice. There's something creating that field that place where we get to observe and choose everything, something is creating that. And what I think that thing is what we call God, or the I amness, or whatever we want to call it, that's inside of us. So when we dream, when we're out of body, even in this physical reality, we're constantly observing and creating at the same time. The only difference is the physical realm, we do it on such a level that's relative to the sensory inputs of our physical bodies and this planet, this world, that there really is no distortion fields, no glitches in the matrix, so to speak. I mean, every now and then we might catch one, and that's what the paranormal is, right? But we don't, for the most part, we don't catch it. But when you get into the astral world, the out-of-body state, where we're just awake as we are now, but we're not in our physical bodies, that world looks almost exactly like, I mean, damn it, I don't want to say almost, it's exactly like this world. But sometimes we will create a distortion, like the playing cards and the mail and all this stuff. Then if we slip further into unawareness, I guess you could say, or like he's saying, if you don't remember something, let's say, well, I want to go to Mars or whatever, but you don't know what Mars actually looks like. So that means, or you don't remember what it looks like. The only things that you know are based on pictures you saw and stuff like that. So that means when you go to Mars, if you go to Mars, if it isn't totally blocked out or you end up in the void, but if you go to Mars, your mind is going to, not your mind, I don't want to say that. Consciousness is going to create the reality simultaneously as you experience it. It doesn't mean that you're not actually in this place that we call Mars, but in that state of consciousness, the OBE state, you're going to experience it different as if you would if you got into a rocket ship and flew to Mars. Because you're in that reality, that consciousness, that avatar of the physical body of sensory input. So it's going to be more defined, more resilient, I guess you could say, to what's always there. If you totally slip into a dream, this is kind of what happens. So you start slipping between OBE and dream states. Your mind has to make up a lot of things, and it's going to make those things up based on memories, non-memories, or the psyche. Right? So when he turned around and saw his house had wood on the side of it, for a moment, his mind kind of forgot what the side of his house looked like, just for probably a tenth of a second. So something had to be created to replace it, which was that, the wood thing or something. So he did that, right? He filled in the gap right there. His consciousness. I'm telling you, man, this shit gets trippy. Here's the other one called displacement. Displacement is a situation in which you find yourself in a different location than you expected or intended. It usually occurs immediately after you have established the out-of-body state. Here's an example. A common occurrence is finding yourself in the bedroom you had as a child. I always end up at my grandma's house, though. Displacement may also coincide with time warps, in which you find yourself in a different time than you intended. Displacement is usually a psychological phenomenon that threatens the accurate reconstruction of physical reality. The phenomenon deserves separate mentions, however, not only because it occurs quite frequently, but also projectors often mistakenly interpret the phenomenon to signify that they have entered a parallel world or have traveled through time to their childhood. But this isn't really the case. For example, if you've been thinking about your childhood, you have just increased the chance that you will find yourself in the bedroom of your childhood following the transition process. Remote perception is often involved as well, in which you subconsciously draw upon memories of the past in order to construct the environment. Under these circumstances, there almost is always a problem with lucidity. Displacement is also often symbolic in nature. You may, for example, find your bed suddenly located in the basement or attic of your house. And the overall atmosphere of the environment during the OBE often provides several clues as to its symbolic meaning. As a simplistic example, if you find yourself in a creepy basement, background fear has likely contributed to the displacement. It all depends on your own symbol bank and personal associations. You'll often have to use your intuition to get to the bottom of things. Journal entry, March 25th, 2007 at 5:05 a.m. Last night, I went to bed feeling happy and excited. Monique was due home the next day following a week-long business trip to China, and after spending a week in an empty, lonely house, I was looking forward to her return. I went to bed late at around 3 a.m. I did not intend to project, but nonetheless woke up 2 hours later on the right side of consciousness to project. I established the out-of-body state by merely stepping out of bed. Initially, I had a clear sense of my surroundings. However, as soon as I stood next to the bed, I found myself in the basement, and the bed still beside me, but otherwise entirely elsewhere. It had not been a sudden transition from one location to another. I did not find myself suddenly transported to a different environment. Rather, the transition was pretty seamless. I did not even notice the oddity of the event. It didn't register as significant, and apparently some critical mental faculty was missing, yet I knew I was projecting out of body and was ready to explore the environment. I left the basement, moved up the stairs leading to the back door of the house and into the garden. It was a bright, sunny day, the garden fresh and lush. It looked familiar enough, even though the actual layout of the garden only barely resembled our real garden. I walked up a little elevation in the garden and watched some neighborhood children and teenagers play in the street in the distance. The energy was strong, and I felt alive. To my left, not too far from my location, the sound of rustling leaves caught my attention. I looked up and saw a large tree filled with bluebirds, and there was literally hundreds of them. It didn't take long before they made their exit, flying upwards towards the heavens in a stunning helix pattern. The symbolism of the scene did not escape me. It was a spectacular sight. I felt energized. I wanted to fly myself and stared off towards the horizon where I saw the outline of St. Joseph Oratory, a religious landmark in Montreal built on the slope of a mountain. Memory of my whereabouts was returning. I lived in Montreal. I began to run, hoping to become airborne with the speed, but to no avail. And as soon as I gained some lift, I was propelled back into the basement, lying in bed that did not exist. Lying in the bed that didn't exist. So partially aware that I had awoken in the wrong environment, I quickly moved into an upright position. I was not alone. Monique was lying beside me. Monique turned and half asleep draped her legs over mine. Almost immediately a force of irresistible magnitude threw me back into a lying position as the basement environment dissolved into thin air. I had awoken for real this time. I was back in the master bedroom. Holy shit. So you see how the thought of his wife coming home affected all that? This guy must this guy's doing the OBE stuff quite a bit, you know. I personally haven't had anything like that happen, but I do know how much mood affects it, though. It does affect it. Because sometimes you'll go outside, for instance, if I went out of body, right now, outside, it's really dark out there. But most of the time, I'm in a good mood. I don't know if that's why it seems brighter when I go outside at night, out of body, but it seems brighter. Anyways, that's all for tonight. We got one more show to do this week, one more live broadcast. If you guys got any thoughts, any suggestions to this stuff, please drop a line in Discord. You can email me too at producer@fringe.fm. You can call into the show anytime, even if we're not on the air, and leave a voicemail. There's always a way to get in touch with the show. 501-777-5631. You'll leave a voicemail. And I'll listen to it and respond to it. Okay, so we're getting a few responses from the movie Alien Code. Once we get a few more in there, we'll have a discussion about that movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. And watch it all the way to the end. It's a good movie. But this stuff is fascinating. Next, when we come back, we'll talk about the physical reality some more. Like, are we actually in the physical reality? How do we maintain the proper construction of the physical reality that we're moving in while we're out of body, and all of that good stuff. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Sweet dreams and all that. Night. Please support the show if you can. We really could use it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for spending time with us. Night, y'all. Sweet dreams.
See